Hi, my name is Gurleen. In this presentation, we are focusing on energy processing and obtaining nutrients. In this picture of life, these characteristics define what it means for something to be alive. However, we are going to look into how vertebrate organisms are alive based on their energy processing. In this picture of energy flow, it shows how energy flows through an ecosystem and how chemicals cycle within it. The light energy from the sun enters the ecosystem, and the plants capture this energy through photosynthesis. They convert it into chemical energy stored in sugar. This chemical energy then moves through the food chain. When an organism like the caterpillar shown eats the plant, it gains the stored energy. But as the caterpillar uses the energy from movement, growth, and other life processes, some of the energy is lost as heat. This heat energy cannot be reused by other organisms, so energy flows in one direction and eventually leaves the ecosystem. The blue circular arrow represents the chemical cycle. Plants take up chemicals from the soil and the air. These chemicals move to animals when the animals eat the plants. When organisms die, decomposers such as fungi break them down and return those chemicals to the soil, where plants can use them again. Unlike energy, chemicals are recycled. So overall, this image shows two important ideas: how energy flows through the ecosystem and it is eventually lost as heat, and how chemicals cycle through the ecosystem and are reused again and again. One of the most important ideas in biology is that all life on Earth depends on sun. Every plant, animal, fungus, and even us vertebrates are powered by sunlight. Let's talk about the organisms that can directly use the sun's energy. Producers such as plants, algae, and protists capture sunlight through photosynthesis. During this process, they take in carbon dioxide and water and use the energy from the sunlight. They create sugar molecules. The simplified equation looks like this. That sugar or glucose stores chemical energy. This stored energy becomes the foundation of every food chain on Earth. Without it, no other organisms would have the energy needed to live. Now, what about us? Vertebrates are consumers, which means we cannot make our own food. We depend on eating plants, or eating animals that ate plants. To access the chemical energy producers originally captured from the sun. In other words, every bite of food we eat is actually sunlight that has been transferred and passed along through the ecosystem. So when they say energy from the sun makes life possible, it means exactly that. Without producers capturing sunlight and without food chains transferring that energy, life as we know it could not exist.
Hi, I'm Elsie Okiki, and I'll be talking about the picture of the food chain. This diagram shows how energy flows through a food chain that includes vertebrates. The energy starts with the sun, which provides the light energy needed for plants to grow. The grass uses the sunlight to produce chemical energy through photosynthesis. A grasshopper, a primary consumer, eats the grass and takes in that stored energy. Then, a frog, a secondary consumer, eats the grasshopper, passing the energy along. Next, a snake, a tertiary consumer, eats the frog. Finally, a hawk, a top predator, eats the snake and gains the remaining chemical energy. At each step, some of the energy is used for life processes and lost as heat, which is shown by the flame symbol at the end. This heat loss explains why energy cannot be recycled in ecosystems. It flows in one direction and eventually leaves as heat. Have you ever thought about what really happens when a vertebrate, like a human, a bird, or fox, eats a plant or another animal? It's actually much more than just taking in food. What the organism is really doing is taking in chemical energy that's stored inside molecules like carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Once that food enters the body, the cell begins a process called cellular respiration. This is where the magic happens. Cellular respiration takes the chemical energy from food and converts it to ATP. ATP is the energy our cells can actually use. It powers almost every activity that keeps an organism alive. Glucose and oxygen react to form carbon dioxide and water. But what does that energy become? It doesn't just stay as chemical energy. It gets transformed into different types of energy that the body needs. Chemical energy from food becomes mechanical energy when we move our muscles. It becomes electrical energy when the nerve cells send signals through the body. And some of it becomes thermal energy, or heat, which helps maintain our body temperature. So every time a vertebrate eats, it's really fueling a whole series of energy transformations that makes movement, thoughts, and even warmth possible. It's a reminder that the food chain isn't just about who eats whom. It's about energy flow through things that keep life going.
My name is Shruti Patel, and today I'll be talking about something that every living vertebrate depends on: energy. All vertebrates rely on a steady supply of energy to stay alive because every cell within their body performs work. With this being said, organisms carry out three main types of work. First is chemical work, which consists of building molecules, repairing tissues, and growing. Second, mechanical work, which consists of movement and muscle contraction. And lastly, transport work, which consists of sending different nerve impulses, maintaining homeostasis, and pumping substances across membranes. To perform all three types of work, cells need ATP, the energy molecule produced during cellular respiration. This was mentioned in previous slides. These type of work explain why vertebrates require so much energy, as they must constantly grow, repair tissues, reproduce, move, and maintain stable internal conditions in order to survive. Without this energy, many organs, for example the heart, would not be able to pump blood properly, and vertebrates would not be able to reproduce, think, or maintain basic life functions. This explains why energy flow through ecosystems is essential for life. Okay, so now we will be diving deeper into different vertebrates and how they use energy. The first category is mammals, and mammals use a lot of energy because they are endothermic. Maintaining a constant internal temperature requires a constant supply of ATP from cellular respiration. To generate enough ATP, mammals must consume and digest large amounts of nutrients. They also use energy to move, run, and stay warm. In the picture, there is an example of a jaguar, and jaguars are large, powerful mammals, and they use a lot of energy every day because their survival depends on movement and hunting. The next category we will be talking about are birds. Birds are one of the most energy-demanding vertebrates on Earth because of their flight, their high body temperature, and constant movement. They use energy for building feathers, growing and repairing tissues, flapping wings while flying, and also migrating long distances. They also use energy for behaviors such as courtship dances and caring for their babies. Besides that, they also use energy for internal processes like maintaining a very high body temperature, which is around 40 to 42 Celsius, sending nerve impulses for balance and coordination during flight, and keeping homeostasis. All of these processes require large amounts of ATP, which is why birds have extremely fast metabolisms and must eat frequently to survive. We will now be talking about fish, and fish get nutrients from prey and algae. They use chemical energy to fuel swimming and maintain ion balance in water. They use energy to also grow and repair tissues, produce scales and fins, and to digest. They use energy to sense their environments, escape predators or chase prey, and make quick bursts of speed when hunting. Some fish, like salmon, use huge bursts of energy when swimming upstream for migration. The next category I'll be talking about are amphibians. Amphibians use energy by swimming using legs or tails. They also use energy by walking or climbing, catching prey, producing mucus to keep their skin moist for breathing, and also for digesting food. Amphibians go through a process called metamorphosis, which requires a lot of chemical energy. For example, a tadpole becomes a frog when it develops legs, loses its tail, switches from gills to lungs, and changes its digestive system. These are some examples of how amphibians use energy. However, compared to mammals and birds, amphibians do not spend energy heating their bodies because they are considered ectothermic, which reduces their overall energy needs. The last category I'll be talking about are reptiles. Reptiles use energy more slowly because as ectotherms, they rely on external heat such as the sun to warm their bodies instead of burning nutrients. Because they spend less ATP maintaining body temperature, they need fewer nutrients compared to mammals. Examples where they use energy include producing and shedding scales, reproduction such as making eggs, crawling and climbing, bursts of speed to escape predators or catch prey, and circulating blood. These are just some examples of how reptiles use energy in order to survive. Overall, each vertebrate group uses energy in a way that fits its body and environment. Understanding this helps us see how energy connects and flows through all living things in an ecosystem.
Hi, my name is Amanda, and I will be explaining heat loss and the second law of thermodynamics. If we look at the slide, it tells us that according to the law of thermodynamics, every energy transfer increases the entropy of the universe. But what exactly does this mean? In simpler terms, the second law of thermodynamics says that every time energy is used or transferred, some of that energy becomes less useful and spreads out as heat. This spreading out increases disorder or randomness in the system, which is also known as entropy.
Another way you can think about this is to imagine charging your phone and it starts to turn hot. This happens because not all of the energy is going into your phone like you think it would. Some of the electrical energy that should be going into your phone is lost as heat instead. This happens because no energy transfer is perfect, meaning that heat spreads into the air, becoming energy that can't be used to do work anymore. This increase in unusable energy is exactly what the second law of thermodynamics describes: energy that becomes less organized and increases entropy. Now that we understand that energy transfers are never perfect, we can apply this knowledge to living organisms, specifically vertebrates. When vertebrates do anything that requires energy, they always lose some energy as heat. For example, when we move our muscles, digest our food, or even just try to stay warm, our bodies are using energy. But not all of that energy stays in our bodies to do work. Some of the energy is lost as heat and leaves the body, just like a phone which heats up while charging. Vertebrates also release heat whenever they use energy. This shows that energy transfers are never 100% efficient. Now let's take a look at some examples. A running mammal releases heat from its muscles. When a mammal runs, its muscles use energy to move, but not all of that energy becomes movement. Some of it turns into heat, which warms the body and escapes into the air. This shows that whenever animals use energy, some is always lost as heat, just like we explained before. Now let's take a look at another example. Bird generates heat through metabolism to maintain body temperature. Birds use energy from their foods to keep themselves warm, but not all of that energy is used for body functions. Some is lost as heat and escapes through their feathers. This shows that even when animals use energy to stay warm, some of it is still lost as heat. Let's take a look at one more example. Fish also releases metabolic heat into surrounding water. Fish don't keep a constant body temperature like birds or mammals, but they use energy to swim and stay alive. Some of that energy is lost as heat, which spreads into the water around them. This proves that no matter the animal or environment, energy use always leads to heat loss.
This is Kaylee Naus, and I will be going over energy flow and energy use. Energy flow from sunlight to living organisms. On this slide, I'm explaining how energy first enters an ecosystem. Plants and producers capture sunlight through photosynthesis and convert it into chemical energy. That chemical energy gets stored in their leaves, stems, and other tissues. When animals eat plants that store chemical energy is passed along to them, so the energy that powers consumers actually begins as sunlight captured by plants, using energy to do work. Once consumers eat the plant, they use that chemical energy for movement and other activities. Muscle cells convert chemical energy into kinetic energy so the organisms can move, jump, or climb. Energy transfer is not perfectly efficient, so some energy is always lost as heat during these processes. Plants also use chemical energy for growth, making new leaves, stems, and roots. The main idea of this slide is that all living things transform energy constantly, and these transformations keep organisms alive. The second slide I'll be going over is endothermic and ectothermic vertebrates. Endothermic vertebrates. Endotherms include mammals and birds. They maintain a constant internal body temperature using metabolic heat. Because they are constantly losing heat to the environment, they have to eat a lot to replace that energy. They have high metabolism rates, which allow them to stay active even in cold conditions. A good example is a small bird. It loses heat quickly because of its size, so it needs to eat frequently throughout the day just to maintain its temperature. On the other hand, ectothermic vertebrates include reptiles, amphibians, and fish. Instead of using internal energy to stay warm, they depend on the environment for heat. Because of this, they don't burn as much food energy and do not need to eat as often. Their activity levels are tied to the temperature around them. For example, reptiles warm up by basking in the sun instead of using their own stored energy. Main point: endotherms and ectotherms have evolved different strategies for maintaining heat. Endotherms use a lot of energy to stay warm, while ectotherms conserve energy by relying on external sources of heat. This helps explain why these groups behave differently and live in different environments. Resources. These are the materials used to build the presentation and verify the concepts. Pearson's Education's Chapter 1 for Fundamental Biological Principles. Uzersky's lecture slides for class explanations and examples. The SlideShare presentation, Themes in the Study of Life, for additional visuals and summaries. National Geographic's Exosystem Energy Transfer resource for real-world examples.